Hey guys, welcome back to a brand new video. And in today's video, we'll be taking our second to final look at the 2022 gubernatorial elections. It's that time of year we've only got two of these videos left, and so this is again for the second to last time my updated 2022 gubernatorial predictions. So we're just gonna get right into it here. I think we all know the drill by now. I've done a lot of these. Let's look at these governors' elections. So, safe Democratic states: California, Illinois, Maryland, Massachusetts, both Democratic pickups. These states have incumbent moderate Republican governors who are quite popular, but both Hogan was term limited. Charlie Baker decided not to run again, so Democratic pickups, and then Hawaii as well. So that's 11 states guaranteed to vote for the Democrats. For the Republicans, they've got a couple more: Idaho, Wyoming, South Dakota, Nebraska, Arkansas, Tennessee, Alabama, Iowa, Ohio, Vermont, New Hampshire, and that is it. Now, there is one more state that I want to add here, and it's Oklahoma, but I do want to clear some things up. So right now, if you look at the polls in Oklahoma, they are showing a really close race. Democrat Joy Hoffmeister is trailing Kevin Stitt, the incumbent Republican, by just a point, and she's had a lot of momentum in the latest polls. She's been up in the most recent three nonpartisan polls, and there are people who think she can win this race or at least come close. She will outperform Biden. She's going to do quite well for a Democrat in Oklahoma. That being said, most of these polls have like a high number of undecideds, and these are all going to break for Kevin Stitt. Again, most of them are Republicans who just don't mind Hoffmeister, but are going to break for Stitt, especially in a polarized midterm like this. So Oklahoma, classic political clickbait, looks interesting, looks pretty cool. Not going to be close on election night. Safe Republican. Now, likely D states, starting off in Colorado. Jared Polis, popular Democratic governor, he's been leading in all the polls, as you can see right here. His average is well above the threshold for competitive. He leads by 15.4%. He's actually on track to outpace Biden at the moment, so he's going to do very well in a few weeks. We're also going to do Minnesota here. Minnesota, I've been pretty bullish on Democrats in. The Republican Scott Jensen has had no money or support from the national GOP to even compete with Walz. He's getting massively outspent in the polls. Trafalgar showed him up by one, but Trafalgar also had Minnesota tied back in September 2020, so they haven't been great in Minnesota historically. His own internal has him down 3, and if you take a look at these nonpartisan polls, he's down 5, 10, 7, 18, 7, or not, sorry, that's not nonpartisan poll, 2. So, they're all over the place, but the average is pretty, I think, reflective of where the race is. He's up by 8 right now. I think he'll win by around 5 or 6. New York's our next state. Now, New York, you might not have expected to see in the likely D column, because it's like, well, New York's always safe. There's really no competitive races there. And I don't really think this race is competitive, but I do think in terms of margin, it's going to be likely. Right now, Kathy Hochul's only up by 7%. And yes, we've gotten a lot of polls from the state that have showed the race competitive or even within single digits. I don't think it's going to be within single digits. I think she's going to win by 13 or 14. So Zeldin's going to do quite well, I think, especially in New York City and Long Island. I think he'll do decently well upstate. But Hochul's from Buffalo. She's probably going to carry Erie County. And overall, New York's still a super blue state. So yes, Zeldin will outperform Trump for sure. He's doing quite well in the polls, but I think a lot of it's just sampling errors and the fact that, New York polls have been goofy in the past. Connecticut and Rhode Island are similar. These are both likely D states that are, a bit more Democrat or a bit more Republican down ballot, especially Connecticut, where in 2018 we had a very close race for governor there. But right now, Ned Lamont leads Bob Stefanowski by 13 points. Latest poll from Quinnipiac had him up by 15, and they've been pretty good in Connecticut in the past. I think he wins by, 10 or 11 points. I don't think it's going to be close at the end of the day. And then our final likely D state is going to be Maine. Maine, this is a state where originally it looked like a pure toss-up between Janet Mills and former Republican Governor Paul LePage. But if you look at the polls, and yes, I know the polls aren't everything, which is why we're not, saying whatever the polls are saying, but she's up by nearly 10 points, and Paul LePage would need a Susan Collins-level polling miss to win this race or to even be competitive in it. And the thing is, that's hardly unlikely to bet on. You can choose to bet on it if you want, but I'm not going to be that guy. So Janet Mills, incumbent governor, I don't think she's unpopular enough to lose, even in a more Republican-leaning environment like this. Now, likely Republican states. We've got a couple of these. So the first is Alaska, and there's some interesting stuff there because we have Les Guerra, the Democrat, facing off against former Governor Bill Walker, the Independent, and incumbent Governor Mike Dunleavy. The ranked choice voting thing, system makes Alaska pretty hard and, pretty ambiguous in terms of predictions. What I will say is that I do think Bill Walker has like an 85-90% chance of winning. I think it's going to be quite close at the end of the day. And if you look at, the polls for statewide races, it's likely that Murkowski and Peltola are both going to win, and that's going to produce a more Dunleavy favorable electorate. So Bill Walker has a chance, but I don't think it's very high, and I think we're going to see, him maybe getting, I don't know, Dunleavy's going to crack at probably 48% of the, if I had to guess, 48% of the original vote. And then the remaining 52 are going to split, 30 to 22 or something in favor of Walker. And then Walker's going to get close, but, he'll still lose 46 to 54 when all the ranked choice votes are tabulated. So I think we're going to see Alaska. It could be totally wrong, but I don't think the outcome is going to change that much. I think Walker is going to lose to Dunleavy by 8 to 10 points at the end of the day. Our next likely state is Texas. Texas has been consistently hyped up as a decently competitive race. I don't really buy into it. I think Beto O'Rourke is a good candidate. I think he's doing a lot of good party building for the Texas Democrats. But he's down by 8 points in the polls right now, and every nonpartisan poll we've seen, down by 10 here, down by 9 here, down by 11 here, down by 8 here, down by 4 here, down by 7 here, down by 8 here, down by 7 here, down by 7 here, down by 7 here, down by 8 here, or down by 9 there. Sorry, they've all high single digits, low double digits, and polls in Texas haven't been atrocious, but in 2020 they did miss in the direction of Trump. I actually think it's going to be kind of the opposite. I think Beto's going to run even with this polls this time. But yeah, we're going to see, I think, trends continue in the suburbs, and I think Beto's going to do a lot worse than he did last time with Hispanic voters in the South. That being said, I think it'll be a similar coalition to what Trump and Biden had. I think Beto loses by 7.5, 8 points, and does about 2 points worse than Joe Biden. Our next state, or our next two states, we're going to do them together here, Florida and South Carolina. I don't think either of these states are that competitive, but what I will say is that, Florida's getting a lot of media attention. In fact, there's actually a debate going on Monday night, which this will be out on Tuesday morning, and I'm recording this on Monday, so there's a debate about to happen there. No, I will not be watching it because debates for governor races do not matter unless someone says something horribly stupid, which I don't think is going to happen. And so, yeah, I mean, if you take a look at the polls right now, DeSantis leads Charlie Crist by 8% in a state where the polls undershot Trump by 5. Applied 2020 polling, Arrington wins by 13. I think it won't be by that much, but I do think that it's pretty clear that DeSantis is a favorite. We have like very few polls that show Crist ahead. The ones that do are kind of wonky. Like this one has no undecided since from September. That makes no sense. And so overall, I think Charlie Crist is going to lose by 8 or 9. I think he'll have a harder time in South Florida than Biden did, which is saying a lot because Biden also had a pretty hard time in South Florida. And I think he's going to get smashed in, Orlando and Jacksonville. The only area of the state where I think he'll do decently well is, Pinellas County, which is the suburbs of Tampa Bay, but that's where he's from, so you'd expect him to get a boost there. South Carolina, Joe Cunningham, I think, is a really underrated candidate. I think he'll have decently high black turnout. McMaster isn't actually that good of an incumbent. He only won in 2018 by 8%. That being said, McMaster isn't, I don't think, bad enough to lose a race like this. It should be pretty winnable, and if you look at, we don't have a ton of polls, but, the only polls we do have show McMaster taking a pretty commanding lead over Joe Cunningham. They all correlate to, an R plus 11, R plus 12 result when applied for polling miss. Now, our lean, these are like the states that I think could go either way realistically. Our lean Democratic states. Our first one's New Mexico. And I think New Mexico, there's like a lot of potential outcomes here. Like I said in my previous video about fool's gold and actually competitive. And I put New Mexico, to the surprise of a lot of people, in an actually competitive column. But basically, New Mexico has a lot of potential outcomes. On one hand, we could see, the ancestral Democrats coming home from Michelle Lujan Grisham. We could see, here's the Dobbs decision, Rocchetti losing most of his crossover support in the suburbs. In addition to that, he's been trailing in the polls. So we could easily see, I'll show you right now the polls, but like we could easily see, Democrats holding on to New Mexico by 7, 8, 9%. But turnout in New Mexico is, really hard to predict. If you look at the most recent, midterm elections, 2018 Hispanic turnout in New Mexico was really good, but in 2014 it was really bad, and the Republicans were able to win the state's governor's race back in 2014. So I expect the Hispanic turnout to be decent this year. I don't think it'll be amazing, especially in a state like New Mexico where Democrats haven't been having as good of a turnout operation. What I will say is that I think it's going to be enough for Rocchetti to lose by 3 or 4%. He has a chance to win. I think counting him out at this point is pretty foolish, even though the polls do look quite bad for him. But, for me to call him favored, he has to lead in a poll here at some point. He's only up in one poll that it was eternal back from June. So he has to get it together really, really fast in the final 2-3 weeks here. And I don't think he's be able to do that. Next, lean D state, I only see two here. I only see two here. That is this. First of all, we'll do Michigan, then we'll do Pennsylvania. So, Michigan. Excuse me. Michigan, I'm moving down from likely D, and that isn't to say that I think Whitmer's actually at real risk of losing. I think she could lose, but the polls have been narrowing, and they've been narrowing a lot. Whitmer was up by 11 points in September, and it's been a month since then. And she's only up by 5.7. No, I think it's 5 point. I hate when it does this. 5.4. And if you look at the most recent polls, Signal has her up by 6. Mitchell has her up by 2. SSRS CNN has her up by 6 in their likely voter screen. RV, she's up by 14, but I think that's pretty unrealistic. She's up by 5 in Emerson, up by 5 in Signal, which again, these are Republican polls, and she gained a bit in Signal, which is pretty good for her. But here's the thing. I don't think there are any polls aside from Wick, which is a complete joke, predicting Dixon to outright win. Even Trafalgar has Whitmer up by 1, and they had Trump winning the state in 2020. So, but here's what I will say. The polls are showing consistent narrowing, and Dixon has I think she got off the gate. She kind of stampeded out of the gate really poorly. And now I think she's running a bit more disciplined of a campaign. Will it be enough? I don't think so. She's getting outspent 95% to 5% on the airwaves. But that being said, partisanship does give her a bit of a higher floor than I originally anticipated. And I think Whitmer is getting a little overrated. So I think she wins by 3.5, 4 points. A lot of people still think she wins by 8. I don't think it's going to be that lopsided, but I do think she's absolutely the favorite. And I think people who say Dixon's suddenly going to win are still pretty detached from reality. Now, Pennsylvania. Josh Shapiro looking, pretty good in Pennsylvania. I wouldn't say it's locked up yet, but he's, looking good right now. He's up by 8.6%. He's outpacing Biden, by over 4 points. I really don't see the polls narrowing that much. I mean, look, the polls have narrowed a bit, but that's mostly because you have a bunch of Republican-friendly polls. I think 4 of the past 6 polls in Pennsylvania have been Republican-friendly. Rasmussen Republican poll, Insider Vance Republican poll, Wick's a Republican poll, Fabricio's a Republican poll, and then we got a Trafalgar over there, which is also a Republican poll. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 out of the past, 7 polls here have been Republican, and they're still showing Shapiro leads. Rasmussen has Shapiro up by 3. Insider Vance, which had Trump winning the state, has Shapiro up by 6. Trafalgar, which literally had Trump winning Pennsylvania by 3 points in 2020, has him up by 9. So there is no way you can get yourself to a Mastriano lead using the polls. He's been down in every single one of them. The only way he'd win is if turnout for Democrats just somehow collapsed, but I think Pennsylvania is unlikely to happen, especially because Mastriano is such a polarizing nominee. And also I think it's worth noting that Shapiro's outspent him 36 to 1. So that's just really hard to overcome to begin with, especially when you run against someone as good of a politician as Josh Shapiro. He's a statewide official. He outran he outran Biden and Clinton by 4% respectively. I think he's going to win by probably 5%. This could be likely. I could totally move this to likely by election day, but I want to be a bit more cautious here, and I don't want to get too ahead of myself. But it's pretty clear Josh Shapiro's, likely to win this race. Now, lean Republican states. You've got a few here. First is Nevada. This is moving from toss-up to lean Republican. Look, Steve Sisolak, I think, had a decent summer of polling, but if you look at the new polls, Joe Lombardo, the Republican, is just doing very well, and I think, honestly, I can see why. He's a countywide official in Clark County, the state's largest, most influential county. He's quite popular there from what I've heard. Again, he's polling ahead of Steve Sisolak, and he's had a bit of momentum as of late. And I think it's fair to mention that Steve Sisolak was down in the polls by half a point on Election Day 2018. He did still win by 4. So, yes, if you applied the last time he was on the ballot, if you apply that polling miss, he would win. But I don't think there's going to be that big of a polling miss again. And Lombardo is a better candidate than Laxalt, by the way. And if you take a look at the polls, he's had clear momentum. In CNN's poll back from a few weeks ago, he's up by 2 in the likely voter screen. Insider Ventures, the Republican poll, has him up by 6. And I think, polls in Nevada have historically overestimated Republican support. Insider Advantage is a Republican poll. Being up by 6, still pretty good, though. YouGov has him tied, and YouGov's been Republican leaning. Suffolk has him up by 1, which I think is pretty good, especially because Suffolk had Cortez Masto up by 2. So if there's a 3-point ticket split, I think Lombardo is basically guaranteed to win that race. And so I wouldn't call it a guarantee, and I wouldn't call it a lock. I know a lot of people are calling it a lock, but I do think Sisolak's in a lot of trouble here. He seems to be having real problems with Hispanic voters, and the early vote data is mixed. So the thing with Nevada is that no one other than John Ralston is qualified to make actual predictions off early vote data in Nevada. And Ralston is saying, wait a minute, we still only have 3 days in. The verdict, in case you missed it, which I don't blame you for because early vote's very tedious. The verdict is that early on it looked pretty bad for Democrats. The election day vote wasn't looking too great for them, but the mail-in vote was very good for them. So I think we're kind of at a wash right now. Washoe kind of looks good for Democrats. Clark County looks mixed. But it's still very early, and I think Republicans are going to have a decently high election day turnout. And they've also been turning out in early votes, although it is worth noting that Nevada is a universally vote-by-mail state, so anyone early voting is more likely to be Republican than other states. So just take that into account. A lot of asterisks there. It's really hard to explain in 30 seconds, but what I will say is that I think a mixed result isn't the worst thing for Lombardo. And if he's up in the polls, and if Sisolak's not polling too well as an incumbent, I think he's going to lose by 2.5, 3 points. And I think that that might be enough to drag Laxalt over the finish line over Cortez Masto, though, again, still going to be very close to that Senate race. Arizona, this is another one. Carrie Lake, I think, has been running a much better campaign than expected. Right now she is leading Katie Hobbs by, I think, in the latest poll by 1%. And look, historically, Arizona polls have underestimated Democratic support, like in 2016, 2018, and 2012. 2020, they were the reverse, although, again, I think comparing any 2020 polling, this is pretty unfair. But either way, I think it's safe to say that Lake has the momentum here. Cobb's had a lead for a while, and she just has relinquished it. Lake is even leading in, the latest. Let me find it here. She's ahead in the latest OPI poll. She's tied in YouGov, and she's down in some of these polls. But again, I think these are polls that have been prone to underestimating Republican support in Arizona, especially in 2020. So Hobbs is going to do terribly with Hispanic voters. Hobbs does not have the appeal to suburban voters that Mark Kelly has. Lake is a better candidate than Blake Masters, and she's been surprisingly articulate so far. I think she wins by 3 points at the end of the day. Kansas, similar thing. This is another lean Republican race. Laura Kelly is a really good incumbent. She is giving her best shot in a state as red as this as a Democratic incumbent. But I think it's going to be too much. National partisanship means a lot. Derek Schmidt's a good candidate for the Republicans. And, we don't have a ton of polls, but the polls we do have show, like, excluding this terrible echelon poll, she's up by 2 in this Emerson poll. But again, polls in Kansas tend to underestimate Republicans. She's down by 3 in this John Brown poll. She's down by 4 in this Kobach internal. In this other poll, it's a Democratic internal. She's only up by 3. So Derek Schmidt, he's the attorney general. He won by a lot in 2018, which was a blue wave. And I think there'll be, like I've said this consistently, there are going to be a lot of voters in the Kansas City suburbs who really like Laura Kelly, but are going to vote for Derek Schmidt anyways because they don't have a reason to cross over. Because unlike in 2018, the Republicans are not running someone who's as controversial as Chris Kobach. So lean Republican for now. I think it's going to stay that way till Election Day. Although, again, I want to see the final polls. Now, these last 2 states, these are lean Republican, but I think they're close to likely. Wisconsin, Tony Evers is in, a lot of trouble here, and I don't think he can recover. I think this race is looking like it's going to be a foregone conclusion. I know a lot of people disagree with that, but look, right now Evers is only up by 0.6%. Apply 2020 polling miss to the state, he'd lose by 7.5%. If you apply a polling miss from 2018, he'd, I think, lose by like point something percent. And if you apply a polling miss from 2016, lose by 5.5%. So look, the polls in Wisconsin in midterms have been all right. They still haven't been great. But the presidential polls in Wisconsin have been atrocious, and I think we're going to see a similar thing this year with the samples we've been getting. Evers is clearly does not have momentum. If you look at the polls right now, he had a lead of 3% as late as September, and he just is kind of collapsing now. I know CNN has him up, but CNN had Biden winning Wisconsin by a lot more. And if you apply that individual polls polling miss, Evers would be down by a lot. So, turnout patterns in Wisconsin are bad for Democrats during midterms. The wild card is going to come out big for Republican or for Tim Michels, as they usually do for Republican governor nominees. And, it is, to me, very hard to see Tony Evers winning. I know a lot of people still think he's going to win, but he is not, I think, well-liked enough. Because, the thing is, in 2018, he only won by a point in a blue wave year. Hard to see how he comes back from that in a red wave year against a better opponent. So, lean R for now. Have a hard time seeing how that changes. Georgia, Stacey Abrams is polling terribly. She cannot find a lead in a single nonpartisan pollster, not a single one. If you take a look at the polls right now, she's trailing Brian Kemp by over 5%. It's actually a 6-point lead now, and Kemp's cracked 50. Now, I do think having a libertarian on the ballot helps Abrams a little bit, and I think the runoff system gives her a potential overtime forcer, but she doesn't have a greater than 15% chance of winning at this point. She's lagging 4 or 5% behind Warnock's vote share in all of these polls that we've seen she's lagging 3 or 4 points behind Warnock's white vote share, and she's lagging 5.5, 6 points behind Warnock's total vote share in the polls we've seen, because Warnock's ahead by 3 in the polls. She's down by 6, and unless Warnock wins by 5 or 6 points on election day, which I don't think he will, Abrams is going to have a really hard time winning outright. So she's down significantly even in civics, Quinnipiac, Emerson. Don't see how she can come back from this. She's just been running a really bad campaign, and Kemp's the popular governor. So I think, again, it's hard enough to knock off incumbent governors. Abrams is not running a good campaign this year. Now, our final state here is Oregon, and I've gone back and forth on this one. I've had it tilt Republican. I've had it tilt Democrat. We're moving it back to tilt Democrat. And this is a race I really want to wait till election day to making any definitive predictions on. But what I will say is that right now, I think Kotek has a very narrow edge. She's down by 0.6 in the polls, but the thing that, the polls in Oregon have been really wacky historically, and the thing that matters more here is the Johnson vote share, because Betsy Johnson's taking away votes from Tina Kotek. We know that, right? And the thing is, the less votes she gets, the more votes are left for Kotek. And, Johnson's declining. She was at 24%, went down to 20%, went down to 16%, now down to 14%. I think at this point, looking pretty bad for Christine, sorry, not looking pretty bad, but I should say it's getting concerning for Christine Drazan, because for her to win, she'd have to have Johnson get like 16, 17% of the vote. And I think right now, throwing Johnson's declining in vote share in the polls and throwing the fact that polls overestimate third parties pretty consistently, I think Kotek has a very narrow edge. So I think this is going to be the one, toss-up race Democrats win, but it's going to be close. And I do want to see what Democrats can do in the Senate race, because having Ron Wyden on the ballot is going to really help Tina Kotek here. So that is my updated gubernatorial prediction. I hope you enjoyed. If you did, please leave a like, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Comment down below what you think. Do you think Kotek's going to win? Do you think Lombardo's going to win? Do you think Hobbs is going to win? Do you think Kelly's going to win in Kansas? Do you think Tony Evers can hold on? Do you think Mastriano can pull it off? Do you think Abrams can pull it off? Let's talk about it. So thanks for listening, and I'll see you all in the next video. Bye, guys.